Before we get started, there will be spoilers for the 1000-year Blood War arc of Bleach in the video to follow. With the stakes high and the enemies more powerful than they've ever been, the Gotei 13 and its allies were forced to become stronger than previously thought possible in order to combat the threat of the Vandenreich. As the final arc of the series, the 1000-year Blood War arc of Bleach celebrates many of its characters by either upgrading or completing their previously seen abilities and powers, elevating many of them to a totally new plane of strength. In today's video, we're going to move through the arc from start to finish, taking a look at all of the upgraded and completed powers showcased by our heroes, and in some instances our less than heroic characters too, and compare them to their last known showing of said ability or power as well. Almost 3 years ago now, I took a look at all of the upgraded Bankai in the arc, but this time I want to compile a more complete video that hopefully captures the dramatic difference in power shown by the Shinigami of the Gotei 13, and in some cases beyond that as well. Remember, we aren't looking at any brand new powers shown off in the arc, of which there are many. Instead, we're exploring familiar abilities and powers that have received substantial upgrades in the final arc in order to combat the Sternritter. Before we get started on the video, guys, if you enjoyed today's video, consider hitting subscribe down below. Your support does mean the absolute world to me, and it makes an enormous difference. And in case you haven't done already, consider checking out my other channel, Mr. Tomo Talks Games. Again, your support over there is making a world of difference in helping to get that channel off the ground and to get it more visibility, and it is greatly appreciated. So, thank you all very much for your continued support. Perhaps surprisingly, the first upgraded ability we have on the list belongs to none other than Sosuke Aizen, who in chapter 514, it was revealed could utilize the illusory powers of Kyokusuigetsu even without direct access to his actual Zanpakuto, as he's now fused with it as of the end of the Deicide arc. As Yhwach was forced to retreat due to an unspecified time limit, causing him to return to the Schattenbereich, he realized Aizen had used his powers to mess with his perception of time, despite Aizen being fully sealed and restrained during their conversation. Of course, the last time Aizen actually used Kyokusuigetsu prior to this was quite some time ago, chapter 392 in fact, when he tricked Hitsugaya into stabbing Hinamori. Less surprisingly, the rest of the Gotei 13 don't exhibit any upgraded or completed powers until after the first Quincy invasion, once they realise the magnitude of the threat they're faced with, and of course, once the Zero Division come into play. And so the next upgraded ability we see in the 1000-year Blood War arc comes a couple of chapters into the second Quincy invasion then, with Soi Fon revealing her completed Shunko in chapter 549, and immediately demonstrating it in battle with the enemy. Her vice captain Omaida finds himself cornered by Sternritter K BG9 and subjected to a brutal assault as he tries to rescue his seriously wounded sister. And just as BG9 prepares to reduce Omaida to mush with a minigun, the gun is suddenly destroyed out of nowhere, the entire top half of the barrel broken in two. Soi Fon reveals herself wrapped in a furious cloak of wind that encircles her shoulders on either side. Although BG9 recognises Soi Fon's form as that of Shunko, he's confused all the same. He expected her power to still be unperfected. In fact, he's referencing the very last time we ever saw Soi Fon using Shunko, chapter 158, the culmination of her duel with Yoruichi. And if you just look at the two different portrayals of Soi Fon's Shunko, well, the difference and the upgrade is obvious. Although Soi Fon claims to have both invented and perfected the power of Shunko in that moment where she fights Yoruichi, we can see that the wind surrounding her is untamed and wild, unable to take any particular concrete shape. Now though, by clenching her fist again in the same way Yoruichi did back in that original fight, Soi Fon is able to collect and charge the power that surges forth from her, and it can now take the form of two enormous butterfly wings that burst from her back. Soi Fon notes that she perfected her Shunko after her battle with Yoruichi, and has been training to improve it even further ever since. Soi Fon reveals to BG9 that she discovered a way to wrap her body in a vortex of spiritual pressure, and that once it's been activated she can continue to fight while it's active, as opposed to having to release Shunko after a mere 1 or 2 attacks, and she calls this technique Mukyu Shunko, or Eternal Shunko. Soi Fon uses her completed Shunko to deliver a massive punch to BG9's chest, sending the robot flying and carving a huge trench into the ground in her wake. Komamura's Bankai Kokujo Tengen Myo has a bad rap among the Bleach community, and for as much as I love Komamura myself, well, it's not entirely unearned. However, after having his Bankai stolen from him by Bambietta during the first invasion, Komamura seeks out the mysterious special power of his clan, Jinka no Jutsu, in an effort to avenge the fallen Yamamoto. Come chapter 556, and with his Bankai returned to him, Komamura reveals his newly upgraded power. By tearing out and offering up his heart to the elder of his clan, Komamura unlocks the true strength of the Beast Clan, transforming into a human and gaining an immortal, heartless body. In this form, his Bankai sheds its armor, revealing a desiccated, corpse-like body beneath. Named Kokujo Tengen Myo Dangai Joy, this version of Komamura's Bankai is completely unkillable, and since the two of them are linked even more intimately than most other Bankai in the series, that goes true for the captain himself as well. Bambietta attempts to destroy Komamura's upgraded form with her explosive reishi, but Dangai Joy's obliterated hand simply reforms as though it were nothing before her eyes. Although Komamura is able to use his new strength to easily defeat the Sternritter, he pays a heavy price. After besting Bambietta and turning his attention to TYBW Arc in order to selfishly fulfill his desire for revenge, Komamura's curse transforms him into a wolf completely, robbing him of his humanity seemingly for good. The last time we saw Komamura's Bankai previously was in Chapter 390, where he activated it in battle against Aizen, but the Bankai was immediately defeated in a single swing. After having been the butt of the community's joke for years, things changed for Renji come the Lost Agent arc, where he revealed that he'd been training to become as strong as Aizen. While that's never quite panned out, there's no denying that Renji became an absolute beast, and that was only further solidified thanks to his training in the Royal Palace, during which time he was taught the true name of his Bankai, allowing him to access considerable power after earning Zabimaru's full respect. In chapter 564, Renji reveals his brand new true Bankai, Sou Zabimaru, an evolution on its previous form that condenses the once enormous design down into a much smaller, sleeker, and more effective package. With Sou Zabimaru by his side, Renji is able to devastate Mask de Masculine in just a few moves, overwhelming a Sternritter who previously defeated 2 Vizard captains. Renji incinerates his foe by clamping down upon him with a gigantic, flaming snake's jaw. And then in the 1000-Year Blood War Arc anime, he gets a chance to further show off this incredible upgrade in a totally new battle against Uryū, where Renji uses every trick at his disposal in an attempt to defeat TYBW Arc's heir. From controlling his serpentine whip in a manner very similar to Hihio Zabimaru before it, and entombing Uryū in a forest of enormous ape arms, to conjuring a colossal, explosive blast by swinging the Bankai about his head in a wide circle, Renji has demonstrated the true power of his Bankai in full force, and his remains one of the starkest, most impressive upgrades of the entire arc. It's certainly a transformative leap from the Hihio Zabimaru that we knew so well, which Renji last used all the way back in chapter 295, to no effect against Xyloporo's release form, though he remained in Bankai throughout the entirety of Mayuri's battle with the Espada as well. Rukia's Shikai Sode no Shirayuki undergoes an unexpected upgrade in the 1000-Year Blood War arc thanks to her training in the Royal Palace. After being swiftly defeated by Meninus during the first Quincy invasion, Rukia discovered the true nature of her Zanpakuto's power, and then in chapter 567 revealed it for the very first time in battle against Aznod. Whereas Rukia's Sode no Shirayuki had always been a somewhat pretty standard Ice-type Zanpakuto, similar to Hitsugaya's Hyorin Maru in the way it conjured ice constructs to manifest its abilities. Now the concept of Sode no Shirayuki itself was completely upended. Unveiling this power as the real Sode no Shirayuki, Rukia explains to Aznod that her Zanpakuto didn't emit freezing air from the tip of the blade after all, like had been shown throughout the entire series, but instead was a Zanpakuto that lowered its wielder's body temperature below freezing. With her body temperature dropping rapidly, Rukia is able to instantly freeze anything she cuts. As she slashes Aznod's shoulder open, no blood emerges from the wound, which is instantly frozen through. Eventually, the very ground beneath her feet also begins to freeze, causing a quake that ripples throughout the battlefield. And at absolute zero, Rukia is only able to survive for a few seconds, but it's enough to instantly freeze Aznod from head to toe. Afterwards, Rukia is forced to slowly thaw herself out again, and moving too quickly through the process causes her body to split and bleed. It's a pretty dramatic change, to be honest, and it feels to me like it was done for a couple of reasons. One, to match up better to the idea for Rukia's Bankai that Kubo had clearly come up with and wanted to reveal in this battle, and secondly to, like I said earlier, differentiate her power from Hitsugaya's, so that there is more to a potential ice-type Zanpakuto than just conjuring ice. Really, Rukia's Zanpakuto becomes a cold-type Zanpakuto instead. Presumably, Rukia can still use the dances of her original Shikai abilities too, but it's hard to know right now. And the last time we saw Rukia using the original power of her Sode no Shirayuki was almost 100 chapters ago, in chapter 471, when she uses Tsukishiro to freeze Riruka's leg in battle. Byakuya is the recipient of several upgrades in the Thousand Year Blood War arc, though they feel somewhat understated in comparison to some of the more obvious ones on this list, like Renji's new Bankai for example. Of course, Byakuya is savagely defeated by Aznod during the first Quincy invasion, forcing him to not only receive healing and training in the royal palace, but to also re-evaluate his own relationship with his Zanpakuto Senbon Sakura. And in chapter 569, Byakuya returns from his lengthy stint in the palace to rescue Rukia from the effects of Aznod's fear, shredding Aznod's many eyes surrounding them with his Sakura Blossom blades. Since Aznod had the entire battlefield surrounded with the eyes, the Sternritter immediately assumes that Byakuya must be using Bankai. But instead, the truth is revealed. Byakuya notes that he is still holding Senbon Sakura in his hand, and so therefore, all that Aznod is seeing is merely Byakuya's Shikai. That's right, thanks to his training in the royal palace, Byakuya has become so powerful that his Shikai can now be mistaken for his previous Bankai, such is its newfound density and overall strength. Byakuya thanks Aznod for stealing his Bankai, as it gave him the opportunity to reassess his relationship with Senbon Sakura itself. In the manga, it's hard to know when Byakuya stops using Shikai and moves on to Bankai, since they now look so similar, but I'm fairly certain he's using Bankai by the start of the showdown between the Gotei 13 and the Sternritter in the wake of Ichigo's arrival, since he's now controlling the blades with his hand. That being said, the anime makes it pretty clear that he doesn't activate Bankai until his one-on-one showdown with Robert. The last time Byakuya used his original Shikai, however, was in his clash with Aznod in the first invasion, when he broke through the Sternritter's blute in chapter 496. An easy-to-miss upgrade comes in the form of Hinamori's Shikai Tobiyume, which has seemingly improved and changed since the battle with Aizen. Tobiyume's Shikai takes the form of a branched blade, and in the Thousand Year Blood War arc we can see that Hinamori has gained an additional branch on her sword, which is visible in chapter 556 when Komamura steps in to stop her from recklessly attacking Bambietta. However, we later see that Hinamori is now also capable of flinging multiple fireballs from her Zanpakuto at once, such as when she rescues Omaida from a squad of soldat, but whether this is a direct result of this transformation or not is unclear. The last time we saw Hinamori using the previous version of her Shikai, where the blade only had 2 branches, was in battle against the Tre Bestia in chapter 334. And so we finally arrived at the main character himself. Yes, Ichigo receives a number of upgrades to his previous abilities and powers in the Thousand Year Blood War arc, and it kind of feels like here, 10 years or so later with the advent of the anime's third core, we're finally starting to see them flourish in a big way. But that's not to say we didn't get to see anything in the manga either. Of course, Ichigo acquires his true Zangetsu after he learns the truth of his origins from his father Isshin, and his new dual-bladed weapon is forged in the fires of the royal palace by the blade god Oetsu. In chapter 582, Ichigo draws his dual blades for the first time in battle, and prepares to take on the Bambis. In the manga, we see Ichigo using just a sliver of Getsuga Tensho's newfound power, conjured from the smaller blade, to completely block Candice's Galvano Javelin, before he unleashes a truly gigantic Getsuga Jujisho, sending a blinding golden cross of energy barreling towards the Sternritter. Of course, the anime expands on this in a big way, delivering Ichigo an entirely new fight sequence with his true Shikai as he battles all 4 of the Bambis at once, barely even breaking a sweat as he swats them and their Volsten dish aside. Then, later, the true depth of Ichigo's new power is revealed in battle against both Yhwach and Uryū, but there's ultimately still not that much to say. The last time we saw Ichigo using Shikai prior to obtaining his true Shikai was during the first Quincy invasion, when he battled Kirige in chapter 491. Of course, though, he is dressed in his Fullbring Shikai outfit when he confronts Zangetsu just prior to having his true Zanpakuto forged, but this is the final time he does battle with it. Much later, we're treated to something of a more unconventional upgrade. When Kyoraku releases Aizen from Muken in order to help defend the Serete from the onslaught of the Soul King's overflowing power, Aizen demonstrates his newfound strength by demolishing the tidal wave of eyeball monsters in one fell swoop, utilizing the absolute power of his signature Kidō spell, Hado 90 Kurohitsugi. In chapter 622, Aizen activates Kurohitsugi at full strength as an Eisho Haki, something he's never done before in the manga. Such is the magnitude of the spell that it causes Kisuke to realize that Aizen may have become even stronger than when he last fought Ichigo way back in the Deicide arc. The enormous force of the Black Coffin wipes out a huge portion of the Soul King's surplus strength, rescuing the Gotei 13 officers from near death. Of course, we've seen Aizen use this spell numerous times in the past, and each time he's improved upon it somehow. Back in the Soul Society arc, Aizen uses Hado 90 to defeat Komamura, quickly activating the spell without an incantation and bringing the captain down. But Aizen himself admits that he couldn't even secure a third of its destructive potential, and Komamura is back on his feet mere minutes later. Then, in the Rankar arc, Aizen unleashes a fully powered Kurohitsugi upon Ichigo by reciting the full incantation, attempting to crush Ichigo beneath a force that warps space and time itself, only for Ichigo to destroy it with a casual wave of his hand. And now, here in the Thousand Year Blood War arc, Aizen is performing the spell at full strength without an incantation, indicating a true mastery over it. The last time we saw Aizen using Kurohitsugi prior to this was, as I mentioned, at the end of the Rankar arc in chapter 418. In another of the arc's smaller and less consequential upgrades as of the Thousand Year Blood War arc, Grimmjow has gained the ability to partially manifest his resurrection, as seen when he chases down Askin and transforms his hands into the claws of his Pantera in chapter 630. This isn't something we've ever seen him do before, and I'm not entirely sure we've even seen another Arrancar perform this kind of partial transformation either, implying that Grimmjow has gained a much greater mastery of his release form since the war with Aizen. Although Grimmjow transforming his hands like this doesn't seem to have any bearing on the events as they play out, it is an evolution of his previous powers. Speaking of which, the last time we saw Grimmjow's resurrection prior to this moment was chapter 286, meaning this is one of the more substantial gaps between seeing an ability for the last time and then seeing some form of evolution of it in the Thousand Year Blood War arc. During the final showdown of the Thousand Year Blood War arc, as the Gotei 13 and its allies invade Yhwach's fortress of Varvelt, numerous characters get the chance to reveal upgrades to their previous powers. One of the strangest and most unsettling comes in the form of Mayuri Kurotsuchi's Bankai, which he unleashes in battle against Pernida Pankajaz in chapter 639. With Pernida proving trickier to deal with than even Mayuri had anticipated, the captain releases his newly modified Bankai, producing a variant version of his previous Bankai, in typical Mayuri fashion, a man-made upgrade. What was once Konjiki Ashisogi Jizo, the toxic Bankai that was used against both Uryū and Xyloporo, is now Konjiki Ashisogi Jizo Matai Fukuin Shotai, and Mayuri's Bankai now takes the form of an enormous, monstrous, purple Buddha-like figure that sits slumped languidly upon a bed of tentacles. Throughout his battle with Pernida, Mayuri was constantly feeding information to his Zanpakuto, and by doing so, his Bankai can now give birth to a version of Ashisogi Jizo that perfectly counters Pernida's abilities. Once Matai Fukuin Shotai gives birth, the glowing golden Jizo engages Pernida, the Sternritter finding itself unable to get around this new creature that has been purpose-built to defy it. When Pernida's nerves attach to the Jizo's body, its skin simply peels away, discarding the nerves at the same time and rendering them useless. And when Ashisogi Jizo devours Pernida, it doesn't have any teeth, meaning Pernida can't be accidentally chewed up, allowing it to evolve and multiply even further. It's a far cry from Mayuri's original Bankai, which, despite the nature of its wielder, was honestly one of the series' more simplistic Bankai, merely having the ability to spew a poisonous smog from its mouth and sprout blades from its chest. Speaking of which, the last time we saw Mayuri using his original Bankai was in chapter 305, though interestingly it's actually being controlled by his enemy Xyloporo in this instance. This also means the battle against Xyloporo is the last time we see both Renji's Hihio Zabimaru and Mayuri's Konjiki Ashisogi Jizo in the series. During her battle with Soi Fon in the Soul Society arc, Yoruichi reveals her Shunko for the first time, explaining to Soi Fon that when it's perfected, the technique should be concentrated around the shoulders and the upper back. As we see at the time, Soi Fon's Wind Shunko was all over the place, but even then, Yoruichi's lightning-based Shunko was indeed restricted to her shoulders, where it exploded from her back in a thunderous display. At the time, Yoruichi noted that she still couldn't control it very well, but that's all changed come the Thousand Year Blood War arc. Since then, Yoruichi has seemingly fully mastered her Shunko, and even unlocked a pair of brand new forms that go with it. In chapter 656, Yoruichi activates her mastered Shunko against Askin, with Yoruichi now having enough control over the power to not only shape the lightning into two distinct wings, similar to how Soi Fon shaped her Shunko against BG9, but also to access a totally new stage and form of the power. In that same chapter, Yoruichi activates Shunko Raijin Senkei, which is essentially a battle form for the Thunder Shunko itself. In this form, Yoruichi's lightning wings take the shape of a ring of lightning on her back, lined with the drums of the thunder god Raijin himself. In this form, Yoruichi is able to fight with Shunko active continuously and deals massive damage to Askin by raining a torrent of lightning down upon him. Of course, a few chapters later, in chapter 662, Kisuke forces Yoruichi's final transformation upon her, releasing her Shunko's ultimate form, Shunryo Kokubyo Senbi, a transformation that garbs her in lightning while also altering her Reiatsu and mentality to match that of a fickle feline, allowing her to further overwhelm the Sternritter. Previously, the last time we saw Yoruichi using Shunko was against Aizen, back in chapter 405, where she unleashes it for a split second in order to empower her punch to such a degree that she was capable of briefly overwhelming Aizen's own physical strength, delivering a huge punch to his chest. Towards the end of the series, Hitsugaya battles Gerard Valkyrie alongside Byakuya and Kenpachi, the three captains pushed to their absolute limits by this gargantuan golem. When the petals of the three ice flowers of Hitsugaya's Daiguren Hyorinmaru all crumbled and disappeared, many of us expected the icy captain's Bankai to disengage immediately, but instead something else happened. In chapter 670, Hitsugaya rises from the mist, his Bankai completed at last, his true power available to use for the first time ever. To accommodate his mature Bankai, Hyorinmaru ages Hitsugaya's body to the point where the Zanpakuto thinks he'll realistically complete and be able to use this form of his Bankai in the years to come. In a sense, this matured Bankai is a look ahead at Hitsugaya's future potential realized. In this form, Hitsugaya gains the ability to freeze all abilities, such as when he freezes Gerard's sword, Hoffnung, and cuts it in two, he has completely rendered the ability of Hope ineffective at the same time. Not only that, but Hitsugaya also gains the power to flash freeze all matter that stands before him, including the very air itself. This is the first, and possibly only example in the series that I can think of, where the upgrade is available immediately within the same battle as the previous incarnation of the power was used. Hitsugaya goes from his regular Bankai, the same old Bankai that we've seen over and over again for years at this point, to this new form in the same chapter. As such, the last time we saw Hitsugaya using the immature version of his Bankai was, well, the same chapter, 670. Now, this one is a little weird. We discussed earlier in the video how Byakuya's Shikai received an obvious improvement, with it now appearing to be as all-encompassing as his Bankai once was, and so as a result, Byakuya's Bankai too has received an upgrade, though it's much less noticeable, at least initially. Like I said, we see Byakuya using Senbonzakura Kageyoshi numerous times after returning from the royal palace. In the manga, we see him using it to combat the various Sternritter during the Second Quincy invasion, while in the anime it is specifically used to defeat Robert in their one-on-one duel. Later, Byakuya uses Bankai to try and hold back the power of the Soul King, and here I'd say the difference is definitely obvious between this version of his Bankai and the one he had prior to his Royal Palace training. This is an enormous, almost city-wide wave of blades that Byakuya is conjuring, even though it is quickly overwhelmed. And we see him using Bankai against Gerard towards the end of the Varvelt arc, where his Bankai is used to skirmish with the giant foe. And so I feel like certainly these last two instances do show a large improvement over Byakuya's previous Bankai, at least in regards to how many blades he's capable of manifesting. However, I'm going to say that the obvious upgrade here comes in chapter 671, at the climax of the battle with Gerard. With Gerard frozen in place by Hitsugaya, Byakuya appears behind the Goliath to deal the final blow. Surrounding Gerard's head with Senkei, rings of blades encircling the Sternritter, Byakuya reveals his Bankai's newest ability, its ultimate technique, Ika Senjika, where every single blade turns inwards all at once, and all of them rush forwards in one explosive finale, obliterating Gerard's head. This is a clear upgrade over Byakuya's ability to use Senkei in the Soul Society arc, where he notes that the blades won't attack Ichigo all at once, to the point where he even says that Ichigo doesn't need to fear that, and instead he's forced to call upon them one at a time. And so Byakuya's Senkei ability hasn't been seen since chapter 164, while he hasn't used the original form of his Bankai, the one that Asnod stole, since chapter 496. Okay, and so we come to the penultimate character upgrade of the 1000-Year Blood War arc, and this one definitely feels the most nebulous, but I felt it deserved to be here. Although it's a little harder to track the evolution of Orihime's Shunshin Rika compared to most, there's no denying that by the end of the series, her powers have ascended to another level entirely. In chapter 675, Orihime succeeds in protecting Ichigo from a torrent of power unleashed by none other than Soul King Yūharbak. Without a doubt, one of, if not the single strongest character in the series aside from perhaps Ichigo himself. She conjures a gigantic barrier to defend them both, and she does so while barely breaking a sweat. Not only that, but her barrier survives Yūharbak's blast unscathed, and even goes on to withstand the activation of Ichigo's Horn of Salvation power as well, which also conjures a massive explosion. The difficulty with Orihime is knowing when exactly she achieved this level of power. Of course, she reveals in the Lost Agent arc that she had been training for a long time so as not to have to rely on Ichigo so much anymore after he lost his powers, but then in the 1000-Year Blood War arc we see her training in Hueco Mundo with Chad. She also blocks Uryū's Licked Regen upon arriving from Hueco Mundo, so it's possible it was the Hueco Mundo training that helped her to reach this highest level. As a result, I'm not really sure what version of her Shunshin Rika to compare this to looking back, but it's a definite upgrade for this character's power. And of course, the final upgrades come right at the very end of the arc itself. In chapter 676, Ichigo releases his Horn of Salvation form, which I think is an upgrade over his Hollowfication from previous arcs, although the two feel distantly related at best by this point. Of course, Ichigo's hollow mask has long since disappeared from the series due to the mask representing the inherent barrier between Ichigo and White, but now that Ichigo knows the truth and the two are one at last, Ichigo and his hollow powers are capable of merging together at a much more natural level. This is only an upgrade for now and not the full picture, as Ichigo himself states he still has a long way to go with this power, and getting Zangetsu to harmonise in order to use it in the first place. But while in his Horn of Salvation form, Ichigo is capable of blitzing Soul King Yūharbak with speed, as well as mixing the power of Getsuga Tensho with a Gran Ray Sero, showing that at long last Ichigo is capable of firing a Sero of his own accord, something that has otherwise been exclusive to his hollow powers whenever they take over his body. The last time we even saw Ichigo wearing his hollow mask was back in chapter 404, so it's been a while since these hollow powers surfaced, and Ichigo's hollow mask didn't exactly get the greatest of send-offs. And then of course there's Ichigo's Bankai, Tensa Zangetsu. After the Horn of Salvation form fails to overpower Yūharbak once the Quincy King activates the Almighty, Ichigo finally at long last reveals his true Bankai. Of course, we've seen him utilising his true Shikai for a while now, but it's not until chapter 677 when Ichigo finally unleashes his Bankai's new form. Ichigo activates Tensa Zangetsu by placing the two blades of his Shikai together, a brand new sword emerging from the column of light. However, Yūharbak immediately breaks Ichigo's new Bankai in two, meaning we then have to wait a little while longer before actually being able to see it in action. The last time we saw Ichigo using Bankai in battle prior to this was against Yūharbak in chapter 514 at the very end of the first Quincy invasion. Although Ichigo is overpowered and beaten back by the Quincy King, his Fullbring Bankai does get to make an impact for its last showing, especially when he uses it to defeat Shaz Domino in a single hit a few chapters earlier. Of course, you could argue that Ichigo uses his Bankai to fight the Asauchi too, but it's not really the same. And so that's it for every single upgrade over a previous power, Bankai, ability, whatever you want it to be, that I could find in the Thousand Year Blood War arc, though there are a couple of others that I also wanted to mention that just feel a little more nebulous to me and that they don't quite fit the same criteria. The first one is of course Uryū gaining a Volsten dish as of the Thousand Year Blood War arc anime. We first see a semblance of Uryū's Volsten dish in episode 27, before finally getting to see it fully realised for the first time in episode 30 in his battle with Ichigo. I guess this is kind of an upgrade over Uryū using Let's Steal back in chapter 124 against Mayuri in the Soul Society arc, where he sacrifices all of his Quincy powers to absolutely demolish the mad scientist captain, and then of course we never see a Let's Steal again in the series. It doesn't feel like an exact upgrade to me because while Volsten Dish, I guess, very fundamentally is an upgrade over the Let's Steal, it's more a brand new technique that the Quincy were able to invent and harness that allowed them to then move away from the otherwise obsolete Let's Steal. That does feel a little bit nitpicky on my part though, so I'm more than happy to include Uryū having a Volsten Dish here as a bona fide upgrade to the character's previously seen powers. And the last one is Kenpachi Zaraki, and this one I am even less sure about, because in this video we are specifically looking at actual abilities, techniques, Bankai, Shikai, stuff like that, whereas Kenpachi's Shikai and Bankai are both brand new for the Thousand Year Blood War arc, and the upgrade is more found and localized around his actual innate strength and fighting ability, which he continues to unlock during his battle with Unohana, the first instance of which we really see in chapter 525. So it's not so much an upgrade per se in the sense of this video, because it's not upgrading any of Kenpachi's abilities, but it is an upgrade he receives in the Thousand Year Blood War arc specifically that does make him stronger. It's just a blanket upgrade to his actual innate fighting prowess and physical abilities. So if you want to include it, obviously that's more than fine, but for me it doesn't really fit the criteria of this specific video, but I wanted to address it nonetheless. Alright, but that's it for today's video, guys. As always, I really do hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you took something of value away from it as well. I hope I didn't miss any Thousand Year Blood War arc upgrades on previously seen abilities. I think I got them all, but to be honest, with some upgrades being as small as Hinamori's Shikai gaining an extra branch and seemingly being able to fling more fireballs, there is absolutely a chance I might have missed something, so do please let me know down in the comments below. Remember, we're not looking at brand new revealed abilities in the Thousand Year Blood War arc. These are upgrades or completed versions of previously seen abilities in the series that the Thousand Year Blood War arc took and evolved in some way, shape, or form. Let me know down in the comments which is your favourite ability upgrade, completed ability, whatever you want to call it, here in the Thousand Year Blood War arc. I'd love to know, so do please let me know. But until next time, guys, thank you so very much for watching. Consider hitting subscribe if you haven't done already. It really does help out the channel. And consider subscribing over at Mr. Tomo Talks Games as well. That is a huge help too. And I want to end, as we always do, by saying a massive thank you and giving a huge shout out to my wonderful supporters over on Patreon, without who I simply wouldn't be able to keep doing this. Your support does make a massive difference, especially earlier in the year like this when YouTube is a little bit quieter. It really does mean the world to me, so thank you all so very much. Alright everyone, once again, thank you so very much for watching. Until next time, I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.